Cool. How's it going, everyone? So I'll start with some basic improvements to Corda 4. There's a few things that come up over and over again. So one thing has been around the CLI, so the command line interface. A lot of customers have DevOps people who kind of automate the deployments and so on and so forth. And in the past, we haven't been so diligent about making sure that the command line parameters and everything are consistent, which can easily break an automated deployment in many setups. So I guess at the crux of this, there's some kind of usability features here as well. So it's kind of nice to have for people who are on the terminal and a bit more technical. But there's also a guarantee. So we make a snapshot, essentially, as we have with the API stability and the wire stability of the platform. We also now have a CLI stability, as it were, where we make a snapshot of the command line interface, so what options and parameters are available at every release. And we're checking, moving forward, that we don't break any of those options. So we're using a third-party library there called PicoCLI that makes that very convenient. And it also introduces some nice colors and everything on the shell, which I'll show you in a second. So first off, I just want to give a hat tip to Anthony, who's done the heavy lifting of this work. So let's just dive into that, and I'll show you some other things later on as well. So the idea is that you can, normally when you run Corda, you might be familiar with this now, you can run Java, jar, and then here I'm just running a snapshot of what's coming after 4.0. So this is kind of in the future, right? But this is essentially what's in Corda 4 at the moment that we're testing. So if I run this one, actually I want to run that with a help option, so that's going to show me what options are available to me. So you can see it's a nice overview. It's a bit geeky and techy, but anyway, it gives you an overview of what options are available. So you can see here there's options to log to console. You can set the base directory and the config file of the setup. You can set dev mode. And then we also have these subcommands, which allows you to run a specific command. In the past, it's been slightly different, a bit more convoluted to get to. If you look at this docs page, this is about how to install shell extensions. So that's kind of a productivity tool. So if I run that and install shell extensions, if you're running zshell or bash, you will then, I'm running bash here now. This will now give me an alias called Corda. So I can do Corda help, give me the same thing again. There you go. And it also gives me auto-completion. So I can do things like, if I hit tab here now, I get the options up, generate node info, generate RPC SSL settings. So if I want to generate node info, for instance, I can do that. And I can hit enter. So just makes it easy to work with from the shell instead of having to type out a long thing. What you'll notice here is I'm now jumping straight into the next topic, which is error codes. So you can see here we print less scary things to the shell. So instead of printing a full stack trace and a lot of technical details that the operator wouldn't need to know in the first place, we're now printing clear error messages. And then you can also see this error code on a URL that's cropping up. The idea behind that is that we don't necessarily know all the potential problems that might come up as running Corda, right, before we ship. So these error codes get generated based on the error condition, which allows support, and when they see an error that we haven't seen before, to make a mapping from that error code into a known page that explains what the problem is, how to get around it, and how to kind of recover from the error. That allows us to add that mapping after we've shipped, so we don't need to ship a patch to improve the error messaging and that kind of stuff, right? So just a couple of examples. We want to tie this back to a customer knowledge base. I know Neil has done some work with support on that to set up an internal one, but longer-term thinking kind of a solutions page where you can get linked directly into there, and you can have an R3 verified answer and everything, and it can all be potentially with community contributions. Right now here, I'm just going to show a couple of the ones that we registered. Obviously, we need to do some work here now. So on the backside of testing open source 4 and enterprise 4, we will take a look at all the error codes that have been reported as part of testing. Hopefully, all of those will obviously be fixed before we ship, but as we then start getting the product out in the wild, we'll work with support to then gather the error codes that are coming in and give good replies to those kind of error conditions. So right now, we basically just read, so this for open source, we just have a couple of things that we redirected to Stack Overflow. So if you get, instead of this error message that I got here, which is OS snapshot, and then the last bit is the error code itself. It also reports what distribution and what version it is, so we can keep track of that, and the error code might change over time, right? So you can then do best effort matching. So here you can see this error code here, errors.corda.net OS4, and this error code links you into a second page, exception while creating an initiative flow for this error code. And you can see Stefan has just added the response to that one. Similarly, you can go to the next one, which gives us, here someone's trying to start up and not able to find Alice, and Stefano realized that he actually just deleted the additional node info directory, right? Just with a couple of examples. So we hope that we can kind of use that to evolve the product at a time. You can think of, from the enterprise point of view, with an error code, you can then get into a page where you can start looking at ways of diagnosing the issue. So whether this is truly the issue that we're looking at, there might be multiple potential outcomes, but depending on, there can be, say if you have 5 nodes all running together and they all show different errors, that might give an indication of what's actually going on. So there might be different error conditions. And then once you've identified the root cause, as it were, you can then go into the next step, which is further troubleshooting and recovering from that error. So those are the 2 main bits. One thing that we keep hearing over and over again as well is that if you try to deploy something and your node info is, the node config is wrong, you won't hear about it until you try to start up the node. So we now added pre-validation of the config file. So I intentionally messed up the config here. So the connection retries, you can see that's a string that's supposed to be a number. So if I now run Corda, and then you can see I have tab completed there, just type VA and then tab, and then I get validated config, sorry. If I run that one now, it should give me 1 error and say that my config file is wrong, I'm hoping. Okay, to the demo goes, and truly did. So it says on line 3 for Node3 MySQL connection retries, the connection retries has type string rather than number. So you can use that to validate your config before you actually try to run the actual installation of it. So we change that back. And that's another part as well that we actually introduced in Corda 4. A bit more structure around the schema for the configuration. So we're now setting ourselves up for the possibility of a more dynamic configuration in the future. So this is not for Corda 4, but we're thinking about how you can change log level dynamically whilst the node is running, how you can turn on and off certain features potentially just by changing the config or through RPC whilst it's running. So yeah, okay. So what I can do next then, I can run, also I had an error before, right? So it ran the generate node info and it failed IO exception while trying. One thing I keep hearing from Neil and Chris here, for instance, is that when a customer is finding an error, they don't necessarily know how to extract their log files from their VMs, so they take a screenshot or something like that and send you a picture, which is not very helpful. So we also created this node health checker tool. So if I do tools, health survey, so if I run this in the directory of the node, so this will ship with enterprise, not open source. And here I get a question. Do you want to include the log files? Because we're obviously aware that some customer might be hesitant to give up a lot of information there. So I type yes here, and then you can see it's running through some things here. So it's collecting some machine information about the installation itself. It captures the additional node info files, what core apps are installed, whether you can resolve certain addresses on the network, and so on and so forth. So it goes through and generates a lot of information that we can then look into for them. So it's generated a zip file. It also has an option. So if they have a support ticket already, for instance, so I have a Jira ticket that I'm going to demonstrate with. They can also just type yes here, enter their ticket number. So I have a R3T1 ticket, and my username is Tommy Lillehagen, and type in my password. Then it's uploading that zip file directly to the ticket. So if I now go into that ticket, R3T1, which is a different ticket, by the way, but here you can see there's a zip file that I can then download. And then if I go into the downloads directory and double click on that one, you see I have a bunch of information here. So I'll just extract this. Okay, extract. I'm just going to open them in the terminal here. So if I do, can you see this? This is too small. There we go. So you can see here I've got additional node info, so there was nothing in there. That was empty. There was no core apps either, actually, because it was an empty installation. But I can get machine information, so I can see what machine was running. It's a Linux machine. It's running AMD 64. It's running an Oracle distribution of Java 8. It gives me information about the free memory, the disk usage, etc.
Can you run that while the node's running?
Yeah, you can. I'll repeat the question. Yeah, so Chris asked whether you can run this tool whilst the node is running. So you can, although we're planning further extensions to this as well. So the way we see it is kind of a deployment verification tool. So say that you deployed something and you want to make sure that it's actually working without necessarily running a transaction through the system. So you want to make sure that if you have an HA setup, for instance, that you have your firewalls correctly set up, your network routing and everything. So we're going to add some extensions to that. Here you can see like a few examples. So it's just trying to resolve a few different addresses. So it checks whether you can reach Corda.network, checks whether you can reach resolve the local host. Here is trying to resolve database, which I've intentionally left here as a bad address. So that obviously didn't work. So that might actually be the error that the user is hitting, right? And in this case, Chris and Neil and Lamar and David, etc., and the guys in Singapore can help drill into that. It's also trying to restore the dormant and the network map hosts here, which you see are both fine. So we're hoping that this will alleviate some of the pain of capturing information. Another thing as well, as mentioned, for the configuration, with the structured schema that we put in place, we can actually now censor out sensitive information in the log file. So if the user has, so not in the log, well, in the log file as well, but in the config file. So if the user has database information, database passwords and stuff in the config, we're automatically scrubbing that out. So I don't know if we have that in here actually. Yeah, so it's just removed all the fields that have any passwords in it. So you can see here there's no trust or password or keys or passwords or anything like that. So it's just stripping all the sensitive information. So we have in the schema, we're defining what fields are sensitive. Which again brings me on to the next topic, which is something that we keep hearing. I'll let you ask questions at the end, I promise. So customers who deploy to different machines, they might be hesitant putting plain text passwords in the node config files, right? So we developed this tool, which is the configuration obfuscator. So it allows you to do certain things. So you can, in your password file, in your config file, you can put in these kind of fields. So you see the encrypt test password there in the first gray square. So if I do, let me just check here. So if I do Corda tools, oh, sorry, I'm in the wrong directory. Corda tools, configure it. So this one is a different thing, right? So you can pass in the config file, and that obfuscates the passwords that you marked with that encrypt block in the config. So if I now decide that in my config file, so in the trust store password, for instance, I can set these two. Tommy is here. I said I don't want to disclose that one there, right? So if I now run the config file through this tool, it will dump it to the screen, and you can see here that this password is now like something that you can't really make much sense of, right? This obfuscated password is actually also tied to the hardware address of your machine, which means that if I now try to take that config file and move to another laptop and run it from there, I can no longer use that config file. So that's useful for things like if you have your database config in there, right? So you have your database password and username and host and everything. You probably don't want to just take that to the developer machine and then suddenly you're running a node on your developer machine hooking up to a production system. So in that sense, it will just fail at startup and say that it's the wrong password or you can't decode it. So the node is obviously aware of this. So if I do run Corda here now, it's part of startup. So now it will obviously be able to read that obfuscated field. But I provided the wrong password because it was supposed to be empty. But if I now try to tamper with it, so if I try to provide, where is it? Oh, sorry. I forgot one thing. So I need to write this to a file, back to the file, because I just dumped it to the screen. So I process one field. I can also show which field. So that's all we process now. If I now run Corda, oops. Sorry, bear with me. If I now run Corda, it will try to use the encrypted password, right? So it's now actually written to disk. And you can see here, the key source has been tampered with. So this is the, in the config file here now, you have this bit, right? What I can do as well, if I now actually change anything here, so I can try to pass in a different value, we're actually checking the validity of the encryption here as well. So now it should tell me that that particular field has been modified. Yeah, so invalid initialization vector for configuration keys or passwords. So someone who's clearly done some modification in that sense. Cool. I think that was it. So I'll open the floor for questions. That's a lot of information to take in, I appreciate it. But any questions?
What is used for encryption?
I can repeat the question here as well.
No, sorry. Tap here, is it? Okay, cool. Now I was just wondering what is used for encryption? Is it the MAC address of the primary network interface?
Okay, so the question is what is used for encryption and if it's the primary hardware address of the machine, right? Yes. Yes, so it uses the first physical hardware address you can find. If it doesn't find a physical one, it reverts to a virtual one. So it's deterministic within the scope of one machine. Right? So you always will use the same one. With the tooling, you can actually provide as input the specific hardware address that you want to use. So if you're going to deploy to another machine in AWS, for instance, and you know the hardware address, you can do that. Or you can run the tool itself on the machine that you're deploying to. One word of warning, which is noted here somewhere, this top bit in the documentation. So this feature is not intended to make it like fully secure, right? Because if you know the encryption mechanism, you can also decrypt it. It's meant to increase or make it harder, basically, to perform trolling attacks. So trolling attacks are cases where people are scanning plain text files on disk and try to extract passwords from it. So in this case, you'll just get a lot of gibberish. And unless you know the physical hardware address used, the seed and the initialization vector and how you decode it, you can't easily extract it, right? So that can be used in combination with other protection mechanisms.
If you pass in a specific MAC address or tell it to use like the secondary or whatever, when the node is starting up, how does it know which one to use to deobfuscate?
So the question was, if you pass in a different hardware address into the CLI tool that generates the obfuscated config, how does the node knows how to resolve it? So The node is always taking the primary physical over virtual, right? So that is deterministic. The reason why you can pass in an arbitrary one in the config tool is that you can run it so that you can run it on another machine. So you then expect it to know the hardware address that the node will be referencing on the production machine. Shemek?
The error codes application. What is the map between error code and the URL?
And so the question was the error codes that come up, whether the mapping to the URLs are in the node application itself. No. So one of the things that we wanted to achieve with this is that we can add mappings after we've shipped a release, right? So we don't want to have to ship a new patch to be able to improve the error messaging. So sometimes that's not necessarily trivial either. So we actually have, so the errors.corda.net domain, that's running a web server. So we can add new mappings to the web server, essentially, real time. Does that answer the question? Yep. Any other questions? Anyone online who wants to ask questions?
Yeah, Tommy, really good stuff. This is fantastic. And I'm wondering, the option where you're extracting the log information, which is really useful, that's doing that directly from a node, and you're given the option from the node to push out to Jira, I guess. So I guess we need to offer customers the option to say, well, if you're willing to do that, we have to tell them, give them IP addresses and ports that they'd have to open to do it. Otherwise, what's the option to just capture that information, offload it someplace else from, say, an admin's laptop so that they can push it?
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, it's a good question. I guess it depends on the customer, right? So the last step of uploading is optional, and you have to provide your username and password to Jira and so on to be able to upload. The other alternative is that you get that zip file that's already stored on your local disk. So if you look at my folder structure here, it generated this zip file there already. So that's already stored there. So if you have another preferred mechanism of getting that zip file out from the machine that runs your node and send it either by email or upload it physically through another machine, that's also an option. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's good. I just also wondered, we would want to prescriptively say, hey, if you want the option to push these directly from the node, here's the address, here's the port that you have to open from the node.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
So we can definitely add some advice on that. And also to note, so as I said, the health server tool post Enterprise 4, we're looking at expanding the functionality of that so you can do even more diagnostics. So checking the setup of a bridge and a float, etc. How to, if the messaging is set up correctly, and also potentially permissions and that kind of stuff.
So thinking about
if anyone has any feature requests as well, it's more welcome to jot it my way, and then we can make a note of that.
Sorry, what do you mean by permissions in this
So it can be things like permissions to files on disk. It could be database permissions, and what kind of use you're running with. RPC uses, what's set up, what's not set up. Anyone else? Any takers?
I just wanted.
Hey, Tommy, Johannes here. So, just a quick question: how do you maintain these mappings of the error codes to the actual errors on the web server side? So, basically, for example, if I got some weird error code generated, that I hit the URL, the URL leads me to nowhere because this is the unseen before. This code has not been seen before. Can you basically unmap the error code to the actual underlying error to understand what kind of the issue it was?
Yeah, so At the moment, we kind of have a default. So if it's not registered in the server-side mapping table, it will just default to a Stack Overflow query, which includes the error code. Also, as I said, we want to build out more of a customer knowledge base in the longer term, which can have different landing pages. And for enterprise, we can also differentiate. So instead of going to Stack Overflow, you can land on the support page, and so we can find out information about this error code. Please submit a support request, and here are the details to do so. In terms of resolving the actual error code, as you saw in the URL, it has both the distribution and the version in there. So if it has an error code that has been reported for, say, version 4, but in the URL you pass in OS version 3, it will try to do the best effort matching. So it will still try to give you the page for OS 4, which is registered, but then we can add information like we didn't find an exact error condition for version 3, for instance, but here's the closest match that we found.
And on that, I think, am I right thinking I guess the server-side piece that we run, the intercept and redirects, that's logging, so we know. So if the same thing gets clicked on by 50 people, we'd know that. Is that something that will be visible to engineering or support, or would we have to manually go in and look at it?
So DevOps, I don't know if you guys heard the question. I'm guessing that's hooked up to you. Yeah. So we are maintaining logs for every URL that's been clicked, so we can keep track of what error codes have been, or people have tried to get information about. DevOps have a ticket currently to enable monitoring, and then I guess the next step will also be to have an easy way of notifying us on any new error codes. So as part of pulling out our logs, we can even integrate with Slack and have Slack notifications to respective teams whenever there's a new link that's been followed, so that we can triage them accordingly. Okay. Cool. Well, thanks for your time. Spot on, or 1 minute over, sorry. Yeah, hope it was useful.
Thank you.
Good stuff, thank you.